All right, my name's Luke. I make. You guys are great. In the next 60 minutes, we're going to put you to sleep. I make role-playing games because I don't know why. I like the Burning Wheel or Mouse Guard. Yes, they don't play role-playing games. You're like, wrong panel. They're like, I thought this was the Skyrim panel. Yeah, not gonna talk about Skyrim. So, anyone else? Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, I make role-playing games like Burning Wheel and Mouse Guard. These are my lovely companions.
My name is Adam. Hey, everybody. I'm the co-founder of Sage Koebel Productions and co-author of Dungeon World. I feel like we need an applause meter here. Yeah, that's my jam.
Hi, I'm Thor. I edit Luke's games. And I'm also the designer, yeah, me too. I'm also the designer of Torchbearer.
Yes. All right, so we have posted this really provocative panel on Penny Arcade's website. We're like, we're going to talk about modernizing fantasy RPGs. And they're like, cool. And we're like, we have no idea what we're talking about. No, totally not true. We're going to say, hopefully, really crazy, provocative things about role-playing games. You guys are going to be like, no, you're wrong. We're going to take you on a trip through time. We're going to get into our TARDIS, our RPG TARDIS, and go back to a different timeline. So we're going to talk a little bit about the history of RPGs and the kind of both the games that were published and the style of the games. Walk you forward a little bit, and then we're going to talk about what has changed internally in these games, like their systems and the mechanics and whatnot, and hopefully we will all be enlightened. So there you go. Let's get started. All right. So a long time ago, in the 60s, there were these dudes in Wisconsin and shit that read a lot of pulp novels and played a lot of war games. And it's amazing if you go back and read this material. If you read Fudge Lieber or Jack Vance or the Conan stuff, how much of it is reflected in our hobby and how steeped our hobby is in this pulp obsession.
Yeah, there are concepts in this old stuff that a bit like reading Lord of the Rings after having seen the movies. You'll feel a bit like it's being ripped off. There's concepts like alignment, magic items taken wholesale from these books and planted into D&D. And it really instills this sense that nothing is new, that everything comes from somewhere else.
Comic books should also be up there, especially Doctor Strange. That was a big influence.
Yeah. So if you haven't read these books, it's interesting. I've read too many of them, and they are less interesting. So this.
Looking good, Bilbo.
All right. So, I mean, I don't really need to say anything. You guys clearly get it, and for that, I love you. So that's Ralph. For those of you who don't know, that's Ralph Bakshi's The Hobbit, a really cool rotoscoped animated feature that is nothing like Tolkien's book, really, except for this one scene. And that's Peter Jackson's The Hobbit, where Bilbo finds the ring. The thing I love about this comparison is the exact same scene, same shot. I'm sure Jackson is referencing the Bakshi material here. It's too close not to be. But look at how much grimmer and darker our fantasy has got in the last 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, there's no way that the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins would be a thing that anyone would make now. Like, it just wouldn't survive. But then, the concept of this, like, chubby, innocent little Englishman as the hero was a big deal.
Yeah. So, yeah, changes. Yeah. So that is the original edition of Dungeons & Dragons we'll talk about in a second came in a box with fake wood grain, and then which they bought wholesale, and then they stuck stickers onto these boxes. They taped on remnants of one of those stickers that said, "Hey, this is Dungeons & Dragons," and it's got you get 3 books in there, and then you can see they're really high quality art. They got some top flight illustrators, and it's not that there wasn't great sci-fi artists or fantasy artists at the time, but just the role-playing game, like the sophistication of the role-playing games hadn't quite come up to that level yet. And so this is branding material for 5th edition. And it's just, we just think of ourselves very differently now as heroes.
But I'll say this, that character in that left-hand image is much more likely to survive a dragon attack than the character in the right-hand image.
That dude is fucked, but he's probably whatever. But he's probably got like 40 feats, and like the GM's probably going, "I can't believe you killed a dragon in one shot."
With great marketing comes great hit points.
All right, so. Other things have changed in our conception of fantasy as we have modernized. So this is The Outlaw of Gore by John Norman. If you would like to vomit a lot in your mouth, you should read these novels.
Yeah, please do not take this slide as an indication you should read this book or any books like it.
Just wiki it, and it'll be enough to make you nauseous. But really, what I really like about this, I'm going to use a big word. I like the semiotics of the images, where you have in John Norman's fantasy world in the late 60s, early 70s, you have muscly Gore standing there over the chained supine, but yet mysteriously aroused woman, and the dark other. And then with Brienne of Tarth, I mean, I know this is insane, I'm calling Game of Thrones progressive, but they're a direct inversion of one another, these images, and it's important to our conception of fantasy.
Yeah, generally in this early stuff, you see that women have sort of two purposes, either to serve or to ensorcellate. So if it's not one, it's the other, and we're starting to lose that. Yeah, it's why I avoid them, ensorcellation.
That's right, that's a real word. Don't edit Adam. You're not his editor.
It's one of my instincts.
All right, so just to back up and talk about, this is what was in that fake wood grain box with the white sticker on it. These 3 little books, 1974.
Look at that guy's mustache.
We don't have many mustaches in fantasy anymore. What has happened to us?
It's a long fall.
Is bringing them back.
And this is actually not the character sheet for that edition. Please don't kill me. Any of you who know that?
Actually, this is basic D&D, Luke.
It might even be Holmes. I don't know. What is it? Copyright 1980. So this is actually a character sheet from 6 years later, but it's essentially the same information. And this is right. You got everything that you need to play a role-playing game here, right? Hit points, armor class. What else would you need? Yeah, saving throws. Right. Done.
Fully featured human being right there.
Yeah.
Hopes and dreams.
Yeah. Some special abilities there if you can't read it at the bottom. Yeah. Right. So now we all play that game for the past 30 or 40 years.
It's
Thanks
40
for
years
coming.
later.
40, yeah, okay. That you should have edited.
Notice how it's his fault now.
That's how it works.
By the way, if any of you don't have an editor, it is the best thing in the world because you totally just can blame them when you make mistakes. So actually, no. It turns out that we were not all satisfied with the white box in D&D, and as soon as it came out, there was this instantaneous chemical reaction, this collective foaming at the mouth of all gamers who touched it. They were like, oh my God. And they started to make their own games. Chivalry and Sorcery was one of the first reactions to D&D. And it's important here that we talk about our mandate for this panel. Some of you may be thinking, but Luke, Traveler. And I would say, but yes, you're right. We're not going to talk about sci-fi. We're not going to talk about weird horror and stuff like that. We're going to focus on fantasy games just in order to keep this under 4 hours. So yeah, Chivalry and Sorcery. Realism was the first reaction, like, but D&D isn't realistic. That happened in like 1974 and a half, right? It's like nearly instantaneously. And then, but things rapidly, 4 years later, people played a hell of a lot of D&D, and things started to change.
And here, you really see a starting point for something awesome. In RuneQuest, there are no classes, no levels, you have skills. But in order to advance those skills and open up certain new skills, you need to interact with the setting. You need to join organizations, and you need to participate in them through the game. Right? So the setting and rules are coming together.
So yeah, with RuneQuest, and it's kind of a given in modern RPGs that setting and mechanics go together, and that you buy a rule set and you buy a setting to put it in. But in earlier versions of fantasy role-playing games, prior to RuneQuest, setting was a dungeon. I'm an elf. What else? I got 10 hit points. What do you need to know? So RuneQuest flipped that on its ear and started introducing a world for those adventurers to participate in.
Also, how freaking cool is that cover?
Yeah, it's like a Bayou tapestry with lizards.
So one of the things that I really dig about RuneQuest, and just even knowing about RuneQuest, I'm not, Thor's our RuneQuest expert for this one. I have never played RuneQuest. RuneQuest is definitely the birth of a lot of stuff going forward. But when you talk, this is the best thing about RuneQuest, is when your friend comes up to you and says, I designed a new role-playing game. It's amazing. Classless, levelless. Look, we're gonna get rid of all that stuff. And you're like, dude, 1978, man. Like, get with the program. Like, not an innovation, bro. So one of the next big evolutionary steps in modernizing our fantasy world, and so we're straying just across the line to talk about vampire, but you got to talk about it. It's so important. It's a nuclear bomb dropped on the hobby of black cloth and white makeup and fake vampire teeth. I love vampire. I'm not making fun of you. If you love vampire, I'm with you.
I like how you said that like vampire was in the room. I'm sorry, Mark Reinagan. Sorry, buddy.
I just don't want anybody to feel like I'm shitting on your fun. I'm totally not. I'm right there with you. So yeah, Ars Magica. This is that next point where the people have played lots of D&D. They played RuneQuest, and they said, you know what? It's not enough. We need to put it all back in the blender and make dough out of it. I don't think you make dough in a blender. You should edit.
It's too glutinous.
You should edit my talking.
Good metaphor. I like that. Blender dough. So I use Vampire as my example of, and like Lou said, you can have fun playing Vampire, but it's my example of a bad game. And not because it wasn't well written or because it wasn't thought out, but because a game, its setting proposes a promise to the players. Vampire says, if you play this game, you will get to be a brooding creature of the night with weird powers, locked in political drama with your friends. But really, Vampire is a superhero game. Like, if you look at the rules, if you've played a Vampire before, most sessions turn out to be fistfights in capes. And it's not that it's a bad game, and they were taking a huge leap forward in terms of setting and embracing setting, but it starts this premise that mechanisms of the game, of the way that you play at the table, and the setting have to be tied together.
But if you take one thing away from this, this is the evolution of RuneQuest. This is mechanics, setting, coming together in whole new ways.
Right. But in order to really, to be honest, and in order to actually be able to talk about these things, we have to talk about this next game. So we got to back up, actually. In order to really understand how and why we are, we need to talk about a game most of you probably have never heard of. So this game is probably why I made this panel, aside from shameless self-promotion. In my mind, this is the first modern role-playing game.
Yeah, Pendragon is the shit.
Yes. Adam and I say the same things using different words.
I'm translating. What Luke means here.
That's right. And, yes, I'll be speaking in American, and Adam will be speaking Canadian vulgar. So Pendragon. So this is Greg Stafford. This comes out of the RuneQuest tradition. This comes out of experimenting with setting in Call of Cthulhu and the sanity mechanic in Call of Cthulhu. It comes out of that, but it does something that I don't think any role-playing game had done, at least not well up to this point. Like Chivalry and Sorcery said realism. Greg Stafford said, fuck realism, you're a knight in King Arthur's court. What does realism have to do with this? But that's it. You're either a lord or a lady in the court, and that's it.
Pendragon can be alienating to audiences used to modern toolbox role-playing games because it says, no, you can't be a half-dragon necro-alchemist. You're a knight or a different kind of knight.
Or a lady.
Yes, or a lady knight. Like, it's about one thing, and it's very laser-focused. And like Luke says, it's the beginning of a very different breed of fantasy role-playing game.
Right. And I think our thesis is that if there's one thing that defines a modern role-playing game, this is it. That it is laser-focused. It no longer has to be one game that is all things to all people. We don't have to play one game forever. We're going to make a particular game to deliver a very specific experience.
Yeah. And just go ahead, Adam.
I was just going to say, Pendragon is really fun too because it's the only role-playing game I've ever played where you get to make chastity rolls. I fail mine on purpose.
Hold on one second. Just in case. So, oh god, and now I forgot what I was going to say. All right, yeah.
Just make sex jokes till you remember.
That's the Canadian vulgar.
Luke fails his cruelty test on this.
So, Pendragon's worth reading, it's totally worth playing, and right, what I was going to say is, it's called Pendragon not because that's a cool word, or I like dragons and pens, or because like King Arthur and Uther or whatever were cool dudes. No, because you're playing that story. You're playing the Mists of Avalon. You're playing King Arthur Pendragon's story. You're knights in his court. You're not King Arthur Pendragon. You will never be. And the game says that. Like, you're going to be part of his round table. And it's such a mind-blowing concept. Like, what do you mean I can't kill Uther and become the king? What? No, his son's going to be the king. So just like that limitation, it seems... I mean, when you talk about it, it seems like, why would I want to play that game? It's so much fun. I got to rescue Excalibur in this game. I had this really profound moment where Uther dies, and I was like, Thor, where's Excalibur? And he's like, it's right there. And I realized, I knew this, I had this revelation just before this, that I couldn't be part of that part of the story, where I couldn't claim to be king or anything like that. And so I'm sitting there thinking, like, he passed on to another player, and I'm like, what do I do? And I took Excalibur. I said, can I get it? He's like, yeah, sure. And I gave it to the lady of the lake. I went to the lake and tossed it to her. And I felt so awesome.
If you'd like to hear Luke tell you about his other characters, come to our booth. As I heard this one time he played this awesome wizard. And...
flawless victory.
So now we're going to talk about Adam. All right. So kind of in that tradition going forward, we're going to jump ahead in time a little bit. Don't worry, we'll jump back too. We're going to jump ahead and we're going to talk about 3 games we feel like are important heirs to that tradition. Tori, you want to talk about the Sorcerer a little bit?
Sure. So in 1999, things are changing. Our friend Ron starts putting out Sorcerer. He starts working on it. And this game pulls back from all those mechanics. No longer 6 stats. It's all about dysfunctional relationships.
Right. And Ron went back to White Wolf and said, oh, this is cool, but it doesn't, it's such a pain in the ass. He went to Champions and he was like, oh, this is laborious. Like, because, right, it's a superhero game. You go, well, maybe we can just play superheroes. Like, oh, that doesn't work either. And he said, well, what makes the setting tick? Like, what makes people do bad things? And he made rules to make you do bad things. Mind-blowing. So yeah, really important milestone in the hobby. Do you want to add to that one? Okay. All right. This other game. So
That was not a complete sentence.
So one of the things we did in Burning Wheel, we feel like was a shift in ground in gaming, was that we refocused on what we call player priorities. Basically, the game is not about the meta plot, it's not about the GM story, it's not about the module, it's about the stuff that you guys care about challenged. right? If you say that these things are important to me, your manners are important to you, your holdings, your knighthood, your like all the Pendragon stuff, Burning Wheel says, great, now fight for it, because it's going to get taken away. And you're not going to be kind of walking through the story like you are in King Arthur Pendragon. You're going to be working to keep a hold of everything that you care about. And it was just, it seems self-evident, but in Burning Wheel we really reward play. There are rules for it in Burning Wheel. It's not something that you have to tack onto a game. All right. We're going forward on this one? Okay. So yeah. All right, and then there's this game.
So, thanks. So Dungeon World, this is the impetus for creating Dungeon World was about taking that experience of playing D&D, but not as it was written in the rules, but as you remember it from being 12 in your mom's basement. Like, it's about emulation of the intended goal of the original games. So while it might on the surface look like it's doing similar stuff, we've come so far from that period that now it's about creating a feeling at the table. And something that's really important to Dungeon World, and kind of comes off of what Luke was saying about Burning Wheel, is that player input. That people are starting to really realize that if you want a successful game, it can't just be that the GM brings their pre-prepared plot to the table and everybody follows along. You can have fun doing that, but that we've evolved. The technology has advanced from there. And so the underlying pieces in games like Dungeon World and Apocalypse World, on which it's based, are there to push that narrative forward with input from all the players at the table.
Rock and roll. All right, so I promised we would go back and cover the missing decade.
The dark times.
Does anybody remember the 90s? You don't have to raise your hand for that one, don't admit it. I kind of feel like the 90s are a lost decade for fantasy. So there are great games published in the 90s, great role-playing games. I mean, obviously Sorcerer is 1999, but I feel like that's part of the 2000s, really, decade-wise, the long 2000 decade. And there are like Unknown Armies, another notable game. There's other games that are outside of our remit for this panel. But as far as fantasy goes, you've got splat books, and then you have these bonkers, like, crazy, I've been working on this for 20 years, treatises on role-playing, like Cinnabar, which, as an artifact, is amazing. As a game, it's not so hard. But this also, though, Cinnabar, Thor and I were talking about this, and we think Cinnabar is a product not just of 20 or 30 years of basement gameplay, but of a technological evolution outside of gaming.
So in the late 90s, we have a revolution in desktop publishing. All of a sudden, it's easy for that guy that's been in his basement working on his game for the past 30 years to put that together on his home PC and bring that to a printer and get it published.
Right. Oh, you want to go on that one?
I don't remember the 90s. I was like 10 in 93.
Well, I'll sit you down and tell you about them sometime. I'm going to tell you about Bush and Creed and... And it's not that DIY publishing wasn't a thing in role-playing games. It's always been very DIY. I mean, Gary and friends, obviously, like they were, hand pasting those stickers on those boxes. Just the ease of it was much better. Like, there's a reason why Steve Jackson's early games, in the late 70s, were these tiny little pamphlets and baggies, because that was the easy thing to do. Like, because you had to cut it up physically and lay it out and have it reproduced like that. Same thing, like James Ernest's cheap-ass games, like there's a reason that they were like that. It's a reason for production. Like, that was the cheap and easy way to go. But as desktop publishing becomes more and more prevalent, as we all have a Mac or PC, you can make 400-page tomes that contain 100-item lists of materials.
Sunstone bazookas.
Sunstone bazookas, yeah.
Well, and it makes you wonder what D&D would have been like if Gary and Dave had InDesign and Kickstarter.
Yeah, I bet they would have failed. People would have been like, God, this art is terrible.
What is this garbage?
All right, cool. We're doing all right. We're going to talk a little bit more in depth about what we feel like comprises of a modern fantasy RPG. So you may hear us nerd out about task versus conflict resolution. What does that mean? What does task versus conflict resolution mean? One of you two talk.
So, task resolution, I think we're all familiar with, right? You want to do something, you roll the dice, and then the GM tells you what happens. Now, it may or may not be what you wanted to have happen, depending on your success. But you've done the thing, you've picked the lock, you've done whatever. With conflict resolution, we put forward a different idea, right? You're going to tell the GM what your intent is, right? What you're trying to accomplish. So when you succeed or fail, when you succeed, you get what you were after, right? You can't twist that so that you succeeded but you actually failed.
Yeah, so an example from play might be a sneaky character is attempting to pick a lock, and in one instance it would be that the task is to pick the lock, and that's all that matters, right? Is the goal at hand. Whereas with a conflict resolution system, the task is to gain the intent is to gain entrance into the next room or to get whatever's in the box. So you
before the guards catch you.
Yeah, so you have a little bit more freedom around failure. With a task-based system, if you fail, all that's happened is you failed. With a conflict system, there's some more play there, and you can see that in a lot of modern RPGs that's leaning that direction.
For instance, maybe you get into that office that you're trying to get into, you pick the lock, but the guards catch you in the act.
Right, and you can see some of the early evocations of task versus conflict resolution. You can actually see them bubbling up in Greg Staffer's mind in Pendragon. They're not quite fully formed there. You can really see them in Ron Edwards' Sorcerer, and then this illustration is James V. West's The Pool. Is a free game, searchable, tiny, weird conflict resolution. So another attribute that we ascribe to modern RPGs is the comprehensive system. Right? It's something that is more than the traditional, like, make a character, here are the rules for combat, here are the rules for magic, figure everything else out.
Right, this is the re-narrowing of the funnel, like where D&D was about one or two things, and as games matured, they became about more and more and more things, so you ended up with a system like GURPS, where it's about everything, so we have to have a rule and a system for every conceivable thing. And games are starting to funnel back down now, where you can create comprehensive systems for games because the game's scope is so much less broad. It's narrowed down and focused on one thing. So it can be really good rules for that one thing.
And so it's a little bit small, but if you can see the In a Wicked Age sheet here, you can see a sort of evolution of what was going on in Pendragon. In Pendragon, it doesn't really care so much about how good you are at doing something, it cares about why. And in a Wicked Age, that's all it cares about. So, one of the stats is with love or with violence, right? So that's what it cares about, not how good you are with a sword.
Right, and in this game is by Vincent Baker. It's called In a Wicked Age, and it is ironically designed to emulate kind of dark pulp fantasy. But right, it is not skill-based or task-based in any way. Right, it's how you do something. Are you doing it with love? Or are you doing it with violence? And so, I mean, this game could feasibly do everything, but it's going to color any game that you play with it because it's going to force you to act in a particular way. Right, and so this is something that I adore. Procedure. It has taken us 40 years to figure out how to tell you how to play a role-playing game. Role-playing games are notoriously bad at telling you how to play them. They just say, here's rules for character creation, here's some rules for a skill, you roll it, and cool, I hope you have friends. Have fun.
They're almost a cargo cult, right? I mean, you need someone to show you how to play, because if you're working from the text, it's really hard.
And especially in the 90s, you see a lot of books start to clue into this, but not fully. If you read Dungeon World, which you should, you'll see that I hate GM advice. I think it's useless garbage. That the GM needs rules, just like all the other players. And there aren't a lot of games that say, this is how you GM, not this is how maybe you should GM, but you're a GM, you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to write procedures for this stuff. Role-playing games are so beautiful and dynamic and expansive, and we want to say yes to everything, and sometimes that's not our best instinct, but it's very difficult to quantify what is happening at the table and say, oh, okay, this has happened for this reason because you did this, 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 and then saying, okay, well, I don't really want the game to go in that direction, so I need to just adjust the procedures for the game and write it in over here. It's really fucking hard to do. You guys are all creative motherfuckers. And you're all looking for, well, it doesn't say this. And sometimes that's okay, sometimes it's not. Well, actually, one of my current favorite procedural games is the 1980 version of Dungeons & Dragons. It's the first time D&D actually tells you how to play. Maybe the last time, I don't know. But yeah, it's often known as the Red Book or the Moldvay edition. While it's not perfect, it's probably like 80 or 90% there, with a really clear procedure, tells you how to play the game, tells you what everyone's expectations are, kind of hugs you on the shoulder like this and says, and you're gonna die, probably a lot, but it's okay, you can just make a new character.
Yeah, and the reason why that's even possible for that early edition of D&D is that it is about one thing. It's about going into a dungeon and coming out with treasure.
Yeah, exactly.
Go to town.
Yeah, you can't even go to town, adventure in town. The game says there are no rules for it, don't do it, which is awesome. No, I'm serious. It's a focused game, and that's okay. Basically, town is the equipment sheet. Like, here, let's get back to the good stuff. Let's go back to the dungeon. And what's really interesting is that, you know, when Gary and Dave and company had their fucking brainstorm for this crazy game, which didn't come out of nowhere, but I mean, they put it all together. They couldn't tell you how to play it. They're just like, there's a dragon, and you can cast a spell, and maybe you have hit points, and maybe you have armor class, I don't know.
I mean, that said, if you came out of the wargaming roots, you understood the context.
Right.
You could decipher it.
Right, so it took them 6 years of writing and rewriting those rules just to be able to say, okay, if you're gonna go in a dungeon, just do this. It's pretty amazing. All right. Player agency. What does that mean? Is this a place that you go to get hired as a player?
If your GM is being a shit, you go to the player agency and tell them. They'll send the fun police.
Yeah.
Solved.
God, the fun police are rough. You want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so player agency, we covered it a little bit earlier where this is about how, you know, you're moving away from that D&D idea where the characters are essentially just pawns on the imaginary board. That if you lose Bob, you can roll up Bob 2 and he's going to be just about the same. It'll be fine. That it's more about the players solving problems and the characters are a vessel. But as games are moving on, we're seeing player agency where you have a character and you can imbue them with more than just hit points and saving throws. That they mean something to you. And they're the way that you interact with the fictional world you're all creating together. And so they count, they matter. And there are games with mechanisms that support that.
And this term is actually somewhat misleading, because it's not just about players, it's about GMs too. The idea is that this is a conversation between players and GMs, and you need to talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have said that. You're right. I am a dirty communist anarchist, and I believe that a game master is just another player. A game master is a player with a special set of rules. And if you want to fight me about that later, let's go. But so some really interesting things emerge once you start talking about the fact that, hey, you as a player and what you want matters to the game, right? Suddenly the rules have to change a little bit, and you've got to talk about that stuff, and you have to talk about each other as people, and not just as that's what my character would do. No, there's no one else here but you and me. That piece of paper is not talking to me.
Tangentially related to that, there's an essay in, I think, the Vampire Player's Guide called The Nuremberg Defense of Gaming that picks apart that. Well, it's what my character would do.
Really?
Yeah, it's
awesome.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Nice.
So the thing is that people are recognizing that now, that it's not, you don't need that defense because everyone at the table cares what your character would do.
Yeah, very few games address players as people. It's kind of sad, because that's the only people who play games are people. Wow.
I need a minute.
I know, that was a little deep.
Existential crisis.
So, all right, and so here now we get into this horrible, fetid word, the N-word, narrative. You hear this word thrown around all the time, and role-playing games, you create stories together. It's a collective narrative thing. But as a concept, it is really important. Like, what is a story in a role-playing game?
So I'll just point out one thing first. If you take one thing away from this whole panel, right? There's Greg Stafford's name again. We cannot get away from this guy.
Super influential.
So this is The next role-playing in Glorantha, this is the evolution of RuneQuest again. Now, RuneQuest still exists, but now Greg and Robin Laws are trying to figure out how to take that idea of distilling setting into rules and getting rid of some of the the mechanics that we don't need, and just focusing on that interface. Right? So this is all about how your characters interface with the culture of Glorantha. Everything is about that. Everything is about your tribe, your clan, your community, and those, in fact, are stats in this game.
Right, and so how many of you would say that, who have played role-playing games, I don't want to hear from the rest of you, how many of you who say when you, a session, a single, one quantum of play is a good story that you have played? One of your sessions was a good story.
Just one.
How about the last session you played was a good story? Yeah, look at that, right? Yeah. So, like trying to build that into a game and trying to interweave that, and so the game has a richness and a narrative in every single quantum of play. It's hard.
There's some, I don't know where it came from, and it would require some research, I think, but there's this mythology in gameplay that the only campaign worth playing is the one you play for 2 years with the same character in the same world and the same GM, and if anyone leaves, you've ruined the whole game. And so that's something we're trying to get away from, that like, I mean, I'm a bad example because I'm in that game right now. But I think normal human beings probably don't have that much time, and that we're all busy.
Luke and I have been playing in the same campaign for 10 years.
Okay, well, so ignore us. Do as I said. No, but it's true. Like,
Fair point.
Non-game designers. All right, we'll go to there.
I just think that's such bullshit. I think we like ongoing stories. I mean, just look at the HBO shows that we like. Look at, the sci-fi shows, whatever. We love these continuing episodic narratives. Like, we're addicted to them. And role-playing games can do that so fucking well.
Do you like movies, Luke?
Yes. Sometimes.
So not every game has to be an HBO series, though. If you can swing it, go for it.
Fuck you, Adam. That's an excellent point, sir. It segues to the next slide. So let's just zoom out a little bit and okay, nerdy role-playing game theory stuff, boring. So let's actually kind of look left and right around us and look at our culture and how our perceptions of selves have continued to change. Where we've gone from a pulp as inspiration for these games, and from Tolkien, Lieber, and Moorcock into the cinema is so much more influential on our fantasy perceptions of ourselves. And the cinema, as I pointed out with the Game of Thrones and the Lord of the Rings stuff, it's just gorier and dirtier than it was 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, this was Ivanhoe's big hit around the time, influential on Gary Gygax producing Dungeons and Dragons. Braveheart, influential on everyone.
I think that surcoat was laundered this morning.
Yeah, it probably was. So yeah, there's just this continuing churn, and role-playing games are so referential. Very few role-playing games are sui generis, right? Very few of them come from the author internally and without influence. Most role-playing games are emulative, right? Where you are drawing on these these sources and putting them in your mixer blender thing, and
making bread,
churning them up, you're creating. Well, in this game, you can create, like in Burning Wheel, you can create stories like Game of Thrones or high-end Lord of the Rings stuff, and that kind of that mixture of pop culture gets influenced by what gets thrown in the mix. All right, deeper and darker, I think, from here, right? All right, so there's a couple. We feel like we've touched on this a little bit, and we just want to address it formally. That fantasy also kind of has a bad rap. It has been seen as puerile. It has been seen as dumb, and it's done some dumb shit. I'm not an apologist for fantasy. Tolkien's a racist bastard. H.P. Lovecraft's a racist bastard. I'm not gonna make excuses for him. Sorry. Pin drop. But we're not here anymore. right? Like this isn't
It's a real Dungeons and Dragons module.
Yeah, this is the 80s. So, does anyone remember the 80s? Don't raise your hand. It was a dark time for the Rebel Alliance.
Thank you, Luke.
Yes, softballing it in there.
Wait. This is Adam Koebel who said, what did he say? There's no phone call that I don't end with boring conversation anyway that doesn't just cheer me right up, right? What did you say? You hang up the phone and fuck you, boring conversation anyway.
See, when I'm telling you it was a conversation, now you're pandering.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
This is a sick burn, dude.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm the Star Wars nerd. Anyway, we're not, like, it makes me so happy that while we still have problems, we're not this anymore. Like, we are actually trying to get better. Not perfect, not super perfect. And, you know, we are also, like, this is a Wayne Reynolds piece for Pathfinder. Like, we're doing some soul searching, you know, as far as gender goes too, and gender and obviously race plays a part in this, and that's fucking great.
I would love to see a Gorian slave master tangle with this lady.
Yeah. So just saying, like, we're working on it. It's cool that we're airing our dirty laundry, and we're you know, we're trying to drag ourselves into the present day. So all right, but also we can't talk about modernizing fantasy RPGs without acknowledging that for any of you who know, we're currently obsessed with the past, with the OSR movement. You want to?
Yeah, so the OSR is the old school Renaissance, and it's about sort of going back to those original games. A lot of it is based around that early version of D&D that we were talking about, and it comes from the idea that a focused game doesn't have to be new, that we can look back in time and see these games that worked the way they were written, that you don't have to keep recreating the same mold. And because of the way that Wizards has published some of their mechanics, because of their open gaming license, there's a whole bunch of these games that are clones of earlier versions of D&D, and that work really well with slight tweaks from game to game to change the flavor of the game, to modify some of the mechanics, and to patch some of the holes that are still there from the 80s.
So I actually blame the 90s for this in a way, but what don't I? You know, the kind of like implosion of D&D. I mean, D&D essentially died and was reborn in the 90s, and it kind of fucked everybody up. But you know, there's been such a beautiful creative foment and kind of this opening of our doors in the last decade as far as role-playing games. And I mean, I don't know if you guys remember how bad it used to be when you couldn't talk to other people that you played role-playing games. I run three D&D campaigns in my office now. I have like 15 to 18 people playing D&D with me at any one time, and they are not all 40-year-old gentlemen. Like, you know, it's a really big age range, you know, and it's equally divided, men and women. And like, there's just been this great embracing of the hobby in the past decade, saying like, hey, you know, D&D's cool. It's not the only game. It's not the only way to play, but this is great, and let's keep doing it. Let's keep having fun with it. I think that's cool. And then there are other games that have been spawned out of that. These are new versions. Like 13th Age, it takes D&D 3.0 and 4.0 and mixes them out. Trail is an OSR Western, and then other games in that tradition. You know, of obviously the Torchbearer and Dungeon World. But Numenera, Robin Law's Hillfolk, Monster Hearts, good stuff like that. So you know, there's been this kind of explosion of love.
How many of those were kickstarted?
Many. So one of the things that I want to end on before we take some questions from you guys. So just in that mode. So we're talking about modernizing fantasy RPGs, and like Adam said, like some of those old games are great and they're very playable and they're really cool. That said, it's been 40 years of really intense play and design in the hobby, and we've got better at this. We have developed new technology to address how things are played. We've innovated. You know, not just us, but all, you know, our friends and peers and colleagues have created these amazing games, really thoughtful texts that change the way you play games, and change the way you play role-playing games, change the way you play games in general.
The pure amount of post-release playtest hours on Dungeons and Dragons is staggering, and it's no wonder it's been patched so many times.
That said, you offer up a game of basic D&D, I'm throwing my dice down immediately.
Right, totally cool. So yeah, right. It's not that the new is better than the old necessarily, but we've been working really hard on this for a really long time. And if we didn't get better at it, like what the fuck are we doing? All right. So thank you all. Sweet. So you can flee, I would, or you can ask us questions. If you have questions, go for it. Can we get question, Mike?
All right, so over the past 30, 40 years that you guys have said, the interesting thing is that video games and role-playing games have had a bit of a cyclical nature in terms of taking mechanics from one to the other. How do you see that continuing? And do you see that continuing to happen? Do you think they're going to branch off a little bit more? How do you think that's influencing the other?
I think we're going to continue to learn from each other. And it's not just video games and role-playing games, right? It's board games too. A lot of what we've learned about writing procedural rules comes from board games. So I think that just like there is an interplay with cinema and novels, short stories, we're going to continue to take inspiration from games, and I think a lot of people that we know in the tabletop world are in the video game world as well.
I think if you look at indie, the popularity of indie computer games, there's a bit of an old school renaissance going on there too, where there are really successful games with one really strong mechanic. They're going back to the Asteroids era, but with modern design and especially modern distribution channels, which gives a lot bigger reach.
And I'm going to say a crazy thing here. At this point, especially the indie RPG, small press RPG scene in the last decade, we may have been slipping, but our technology for play is so far advanced from any electronic RPG at the moment. There's a ton that they can learn from us, and I know that they will. I know they'll keep trying to draw inspiration, and there'll be a dialogue of design between the two. It's cool. All right,
thank you.
Over here.
So I'm a board game and role-playing game designer. I'm part of an organization called the Game Makers Guild that meets here in the Boston area. We do primarily board games. We have about 400 members. But starting next month, we're about to start doing RPG playtest meetups.
Nice.
And any of you are welcome to join. But my question is, what advice do you have for organizing large playtests of RPGs and running them to get the most out of them?
Give your game away. For Dungeon World, we got a ton of playtests because we licensed the game Creative Commons, and we're like, look, just please make it good, and gave it to as many people as we could. It takes time, it takes a lot of effort, and learning to do focused playtests. With an RPG, it can be hard because people are always clamoring for some new thing. You'll give it to them, they'll say, it was fun, it was good. But having a group or groups that you can rely on to adhere to the rules as they're written is a lot harder in a role-playing game than it is in a board game. So having more people, just giving it away, getting it out there, more people will give you higher results. You kind of want to go for a cast the wide net approach.
But I will also say that playtesting should be a two-phase process, right? So start with your internal playtesting with people you know, and make sure that you can create a game that you enjoy playing and that delivers results consistently. And once you have that, and you've created the game, you've playtested the game, now it's time to take your text, right, and deliver that out to your outside playtesters. And then, you may catch errors in the game, but it's more about playtesting the text and making sure that you've communicated your game properly so that people understand how to play it.
Any advice on getting it out apart from story game forum and that kind of
Social media. Seriously, get all up on Twitter. Google Plus is just full of nerds.
It's true. Also, you should be playing if you're making games and you're not going to gaming conventions and grabbing people to play your games, then you're doing yourself a disservice. You got to play games with people to convince them. Reading games sucks. All right, we're good. Yeah.
Okay, so you guys talked a little bit about the art changing throughout the games, and do you think that as the art world grows and changes, particularly the illustration fields, and do you think you're going to, that even the indie RPG scene is going to be more influenced by the very stereotypical, for lack of a better term, cookie cutter art, video game art that tends to permeate a lot of the tabletop role-playing games as well, or do you think that the artwork might move in a more diverse style, and whether that's better for the game world or if it's something that should, like, that it needs to be the same to continue to draw the crowd that's used to it in?
Oh, that's a great question. So as small press and indie folk, we have the privilege ourselves of having no marketing manager telling us, like, this is what tests well in Illinois.
Yeah, I'm sorry, women in this game are off-brand.
So
yeah, there's always going to be big AAA people with highly paid, well, relatively speaking, tabletop role-playing is not a big market, but there's always going to be people with art directors that are aiming for that mass market appeal. And like Luke said, we have the freedom as indie designers not to have to go that route. And hopefully the more we're able to do that, the more fans our games get, the more that affects the bottom line of those bigger companies.
Right, and there is, if you're involved in some of the online communities like G+, or RPGNet, or Story Games, or something like that, there is this incredible soul-searching going on right now in our community. And it's painful to be a part of it, it's painful to watch, but basically saying that, hey, sometimes the stuff we do isn't always the best for everyone who likes our games, and sometimes we need to be a little more cognizant of that, we need to be a little more inclusive, a little more representative, and it's great. It's really, it's amazing to watch, and it's great to be a part of. So I think on the indie front, we have the privilege of having really smart people tugging on our sleeves, being like, dude, be smarter, and that's, which I really value and honor that input. And I think that it's like punk rock. Like, a lot of games that get released in our scene set the tempo for what's happening out there. Like, I don't know if any of you guys work for Wizards or whatever, but last year or 2 years ago, Wizards, their art director did a blog post about trying to make the art in the game more inclusive and more representative. It was amazing. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but the fan community reacted very badly to it in every possible way on all fronts. So, like, we have to learn to be gracious as we go through these growing pains and learning to kind of stop being mouth-breathing troglodytes. But we're working on it. It's happening. Does that answer your question?
I think so.
I'll take it. All right, back over here.
So you mentioned Vampire earlier in the presentation. I was wondering if you had a thought to White Wolf's other actual fantasy game, Exalted. Opinions?
It's rad. We left Exalted off because it is fantasy. It is more anime influenced fantasy. It feels like, to me, Exalted feels like it just draws from a different tradition than kind of swords and sorcery and pulp and whatnot. It's a much more modern fantasy game.
I really like reading my Exalted books, but the bar to entry for play is so high because the mechanisms don't have anything to do with the setting, really. Like, it should be more like Glorantha, in that the mechanisms of the game should be tied better to the setting. It still suffers from the same sort of White Wolf-itis that they had before. That being said, it's probably my favorite White Wolf game. But again, like, it's a bar to entry thing for sure.
And honestly, I just don't know it well enough to speak intelligently about it.
I can't read splat books. I'm allergic to them. Sorry.
No, that's all right. For starters, minor complaint, got a nerd right. You showed an image, you said it was from the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings. It was actually from Rankin Bass.
Oh, Rankin Bass, I'm sorry. I misspoke.
Same guys as Thundercats and the old Rudolph claymation nonsense.
Sorry, I knew that, Rankin Bass. I'm tired.
You're a Wildhammer historian.
Right, not, it's the,
I had
it's...
the nerd punch it's a con, I have to.
No, please, thank you. I appreciate that.
Through gritted teeth. My actual related question, partly on the subject of mouth-breathing troglodytes. A constant problem I've had with various roles. It's like Fat Vader. constant problem, especially with trying to introduce new people to RPGs, at least for me, and I've even like started to slide into that trap, is total GM control. Really big problem in D&D. A problem that really can't be rectified with some of the more complicated systems because you need somebody who knows all the rules, and the one guy who's going to know all the rules in a game like, say, moving out of fantasy like Shadowrun or Rifts, where it gets way complicated and user-unfriendly fast. And it puts a lot of power in the hands of the GM, and I find that it's really hard to get new people involved when you've got things like, you know, killer GMs who want to kill off the party and they feel like that's an accomplishment, where they're basically gods that consider themselves players. Have you considered, as far as the evolution goes, straying farther away from GM control and treating them more like a fellow player, since they seem to want to do that often anyway?
Have you played Fiasco?
I have not played Fiasco.
Play Fiasco.
Does it do that?
It makes everybody the GM.
Okay, that's something that I would very much look into.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to replace Pathfinder for that group, right? Like, if that's the kind of game that your folks are jamming on, it's not going to be a replacement. But it's a good experience that puts everybody on a level playing field. And there's lots of games like that. Microscope does the same thing.
Okay.
And just as a thought experiment for your group, it's a nice diversion.
Yeah, and just as far as our games go, like we love the role of Game Master and the Dungeon Master, and we really believe in that position, you know, as it being important in our type of role-playing games. But we write rules, like those powers that GM gets are written in the rules. They're not just assumptions that you're dragging from other games. Like this is like you have a series of duties as the game master in our games, and we feel like that kind of takes some of the burden of responsibility off. You're just saying, "Oh, I'm just playing the game with you, and this is my job while playing the game."
Right. That said, I mean, a game's rules can shape a group's interpersonal dynamics, but they cannot fix someone who is acting in bad faith, right? Who's being a jerk. That is outside the remit of the rules. That is the interpersonal relationships that are at the table.
Yeah, sometimes you got to talk about that stuff. But just to talk a little bit about like that power dynamic in fantasy games, just specifically, I'm going to tell you about my game, Adam.
I'm really sorry, guys.
Anyway, it's something that like there's a gulf of power between players and GM in traditional D&D and that style of game. And for me, what I really try, the role and the perspective that I try to take on is that I am totally on the player's side. I'm absolutely rooting for the players. I want them to be successful, right? I cheer on every tiny victory that they have. On the other hand, it is my job to not tell them any secrets, right? Not to be objective, to roll the damage die in front of them and be like, that's a 7, you're dead, right? Like, and so it's this weird like fine line, but to basically say, hey, we're all playing this game. This is the game. These are the rules of the game that I have to go by, which are a lot of them involve killing you. But I really hope you make it. And trying to take away, like I find like my worst moments in D&D are when I'm like behind the screen going, why didn't you go left, go left, go left, go left, you fuckers, you dumb, go left. Like when I am emotionally invested in a decision that the players are making, rather than just saying like, hey, yeah, cool, awesome, you went right. Let's all die at the hands of the hobgoblins. There was a wand of fireballs down that corridor, or death over here. And we're like, that's a somewhat glib example. Actually happened. But yeah, just like I just try to not invest myself in that way in the game.
Okay. That helps a fair bit. That actually answers a lot of my question. The other, there was one thing.
Well, we have very little time. Do you mind if we take another question? We're in fact over.
We're happy to talk after.
Are we done? We're fine? Oh, all right. Yeah, we'll talk after, but yeah, okay.
Hi, Chart Polaris. It's a rotating game with GMs. Hi, love Dungeon World. Best D&D yet. My question, I'm a big fan of the really short form games like Ghost Echo or Big Crab Truckers, is it? Mother Truckers. What do you think is the minimum amount that an RPG can get to? Because those are just like 1 or 2 page games.
I think a role-playing game needs as many rules as it needs to be a good game, right? Like, it really varies. There's a lot of games that, like, if a game is written to be an express experiment in how few rules that it can have, it may not be the best game that it can be. Like, a game should be however long it needs to be to succeed. I mean, that being said, not every game needs 300 or 400 pages. We're a bad group to ask because both our games are really
But that
long.
said, if you like Vincent's games, I mean, he put out Sundered Age, which is written on two sides of a business card, I think.
Yep. Yeah.
Can I plug my Jurassic Central Park, the chicken wing eating based mechanic game about dinosaurs in New York City?
You just did.
Yeah, I think you just did.
Oh gosh.
So,
Creative
no.
Commons.
No, you can't.
You talked on connecting mechanics with setting quite a bit, and Dungeon World and Burning Wheel, they both have a setting that's pretty deeply tied with the mechanics themselves are pretty generic overall. Like, for instance, Burning Empires, which is very setting specific, and mouse guard and stuff like that. How important would you say it overall is? I mean, I guess you guys are all kind of biased because you do the setting specific, but how important is it to tie the setting together with it as opposed to making a comprehensive rule set that's universal?
So I don't think that universal games, even though they claim to be, actually are. If you look at Fate, like Fate says it right out the gate, though, you can play just about any setting that you like using Fate, but the characters have to be like this. They're a certain type of person. So I think it's false to presume that there is such a thing as a good generic role-playing game.
And like, one of our design tenets is that the rules are the setting. Everything else, all the things that are written on the paper and the margins, and this city has 186,000 people, and it's the biggest city in the fantasy world. That's great, fantastic. That does not help me run this game. That doesn't do anything for me. I mean, okay, I don't have to think of a name for this city. No one cares what the population is. How much is 186,000 people? Is that a big city? Is that a little city? It's an enormous medieval city. But if you look at our game, so we have a sci-fi version of one of our games, Burning Empires, and a fantasy version, Burning Wheel. Like, is it just the same rules with like swords and lasers? Look at the rules for sword fighting in the two games, right? The rules for sword fighting in Burning Wheel are super intense, right? Super intense. And often in a sword fight, you don't really want a sword. You're like, I wish I had a pole axe now. This sword fight would be way easier if I could just pole axe you. In Burning Empires, a sword is almost like an accoutrement. It's like, it's something that you might get to use once in a while, and when you get to use it, you're probably going to chop somebody in half because it's a space sword.
Well, yeah, and that goes to show that even outside of genre, like the intent of the tone of the game should change the mechanics. Like a knife fight in a game that's supposed to be like Dune is very different than a knife fight in a game about street crime, right? Like, even if it's the same goal, the same conflict, what it's actually about and what place it takes in the general scope of the mechanics is going to be different. So, I mean, it sounds to me like, to go back to your original question, it's very important.
Yeah, your rules are the setting, always. And it's one of the reasons why that Vampire drives us crazy too, is because why are there rules for flamethrowers and machine guns and tanks in Vampire? Like, what's going on?
You don't remember the end of Dracula?
Oh, right. Renfield driving the tank through the town.
He's in an M1 Abrams right up against Dracula.
Cool. All right, we're gonna take another question. Right? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. I was curious to get your reaction on. We're talking about mechanics that encourage narrative play. What comments or feedback do you have on the Star Wars: Age of the Empire narrative dice system? I've been using that for about a year.
Have you played it? Yeah. Comment.
I really like it. Yeah. And I think just because it's part of an arc, and I think that Fantasy Flight's next game that isn't Star Wars or Warhammer is going to be even better because they're funneling this process down. They're doing some cool things that the rest of us haven't really thought about. And plus, they're a board game company, so they can make wicked custom dice and crazy stand-ups. And I think that as far as how the dice rolls affect the narrative, like the funny dice are useful, but not, a 6 and a star shape are the same thing. Right? But I think they're going in the right direction, and that it's cool to see such a mainstream property and a big license do some like weird narrative stuff. And you're starting to see more and more of that. D&D Next has some kind of funky hippie mechanics in it, and it's going to keep happening. Right? They're going to be piecemeal at first, and give it another 10 or 15 years, and Fantasy Flight will be releasing like a weird storyboard game with custom cards.
10 or 15 minutes.
That guy kind of stole my thunder a little bit, but Fantasy Flight.
How dare you?
This was so mean. But when you're kind of in the beginning, right? You're kind of mixing your ingredients and throw them in that blender thing that we were painfully talking about.
What
before.
blender mixer?
The blender mixer thing. When you've got narrative on one side, you've got game mechanics on the other side, and you really have a really strong vision, say for narrative, and you're having trouble making it work game mechanic wise. Like, how do you decide what you're going to do?
One of the things that we do early on in our process is we take our setting materials and take our narrative. We lay them out and we really try to dissect them, and we say, okay, what's going on here? Why did this happen? Right? Why does this elf get to battle this Balrog and win? Why does this elf battle the Balrog and lose? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, the mechanics can be used, Burning Wheel and Dungeon World both do it. The mechanics can be used to imply things about the setting. So in Dungeon World, the elf might have a special ability where it's like when you parlay with a dwarf, you always do it at a penalty. It's always harder for you. And so it's not flat out saying elves and dwarves were at war, but it's like there's tension there. And it's implied through the mechanic. It actually matters. It's on the character sheet. It changes the way you play the game as an elf or a dwarf and modifies the game.
Right, so that's the key, is just never forget, if any of you are looking to design a game, that all your game rules are doing is modifying the behavior of the people at the table. You're giving them a series of decisions to make, and perhaps incentivizing one or penalizing another, or just coloring a decision. And that's it. Like, so if your players are making the wrong decision, that's a terrible thing to say, but if they're making decisions that you don't like and you don't feel like should be part of your game, then you have to feel out a way to incentivize the right decisions. Right. Right. I mean, if all your vampires, like if you sit down to play Vampire and all the players look at each other and be like, National Guard Armory, 10 minutes, great, and they just roll over there, grab their tanks and heavy machine guns, and then just roll around being like, blood points, cop blood, I love cop blood. Then maybe you need to think about how that game is playing.
Coming soon from Burning Wheel, Bruja Tank Commander 2015.
All right, you got time?
I can't top that.
All right.
Hi. So,
hello.
I have read 2 out of 3 of your systems. Sorry.
Sorry.
What's up with ability scores in D&D and role-playing games nowadays?
What is up with ability scores?
I don't even know what the 5e abilities are.
Because what I'm wondering is...
But are they 3 to
do they still have a place?
What's it?
Do they still have a place, especially in story gaming?
So maybe, right? They create a boundary that defines your character, right? If my character is X amount of strong and Luke's character is Y amount of strong, we can compare them. We have a space to analyze what those characters can do. And so if your game requires knowing how X or Y strong those characters are, then it is important. It doesn't matter what the game is about. That's a part of it. But if it doesn't matter those things, or it's not important, if it's a game about dating, you probably don't need to know how strong you are versus your date, right?
So one of the other things that's super important, and we forget because we're all so good at this. We played these games for so long and so well. And, we look at the stats and we're just like, boring. Why am I rolling this? But it's abilities are handles for players. When you look at those 6 stats with fresh eyes, you're looking at them and saying, oh, this is my character. This is who I am. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm bad at. That's the first box that you're drawing around the character. In D&D, your stats are more important than your class. Neither are terribly important.
So, when you're playing a game, watch a player that's at a loss for what to do. What's the first thing that player does? Look at their sheet. Right. They're looking for inspiration. And what that sheet tells them is what's going to key them instead of the next thing that they're going to do. So if you want it to be about fighting guys, right? Strength is a great stat. If you want it to be about how you're going to connect with your community, the people around you, then maybe that's not the right stat for that game.
Yeah, your stats are your first piece of your setting. And right, so having these kind of like statistical like census stats for every character doesn't make sense, but saying like, hey, this is what's important to evoke about these characters in the game, super important, absolutely crucial.
Yeah, if you want to see a game that uses stats in a traditional way but names the stats differently, look at Apocalypse World. There's a stat there for cool and a stat for weird. And they're all just as important as strength and dexterity and constitution are in D&D.
Cool. Thank you all for sticking around for
Thanks,
the
guys.
Q&A.